Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Jen, and I'm really so excited I can't talk, to be able to talk about crustaceans today. I know with all of you tuning in today that you're just as excited about crustaceans as I am. So if you'd love to send a comment about what your favorite crustacean is, or, just kind of chime along for today, you're always more than welcome to participate alongside. So you can do so by texting in on our number right below right here, 562-286-1838. And we'd love to be able to hear any kind of text, or feel free to send in those texts so we can hear from you today. And of course, later on, if you're watching this, you're always more than welcome to email us down below at live@lbaop.org. All right, so today we are talking all about crustaceans, one of my favorite groups, as mentioned before. When you think about crustaceans, what kind of comes to mind? Thinking something hard? Probably, right? What else kind of comes to mind? Beady eyes? Oh, so cute, indeed. What else kind of comes to mind? For me, usually red in color, maybe a little hairy with stuff on it sometimes. Anything else when you think about a crustacean? Maybe you're thinking about types of crustaceans. Maybe you're thinking about lobsters or crabs or maybe shrimp, right? Or maybe even, dare I say, a barnacle, right? So there are lots of different crustaceans out there. And believe it or not, there are close to, I think 60 or maybe a little over of 68,000 varieties of crustacean out there. About 15% of them live out in freshwater and the rest are all saltwater. So these crustaceans are incredibly diverse, meaning that they live in a wide variety of habitats. Here we can see our carrier crab right here uses its back legs. Hey, guess what? Kind of red and hairy, huh? So this crustacean uses these legs to be able to carry things on it, maybe to help it camouflage, right? So they might live in cold waters of the Pacific Northwest that are a little bit deeper. But not only do they live in colder waters, they may live in warmer waters. They may live in shallow waters. These crustaceans are incredibly diverse, so they can pretty much live about anywhere. So much so that sometimes they can even live on land, for instance, or they can live in the super deep sea where we have the magma and our ocean sea floor meeting together, and we have some crustaceans living down there, like things like squat lobsters. So no matter where they are, they could pretty much survive. Well, maybe not in space that we know of as of yet, right? But these crustaceans are incredibly hardy, partly because of a shell that these animals have, right? So if we think about these crustaceans, what do you think some features that they share? That hard skeleton on the outside is definitely one of them, isn't it? Yeah, and we like to call that an exoskeleton. So here we have another one of our crabs right here, also known as a tuna crab. And so we can see that it has a really hard skeleton all on the outside. Now this one also happens to have fun little pincher friends, located right over here, right? One on each side. But not only do they happen to have a hard exoskeleton, a hard outside, they also happen to have a squishy inside. It's a good thing that this hard outside is great at protecting those squishy bits on the inside. Now, of course, if you had a hard shell on the outside and it was completely hard, you'd pretty much just kind of walk like this, right? It would be really tricky. But luckily for them, they have jointed appendages too, meaning that basically where they need to kind of move, they have areas that they can kind of move along to help them move a little bit more smoothly. So if you kind of think about, a knight in shining armor, where the armor is not completely stiff, but they're able to basically move different parts, right? A little bit more elegantly, or maybe not like a robot, right? But those parts go on ahead and really help it to survive and to really protect its outsides. Now, there are other crabs, though, that do have that exoskeleton, but they are able to hide some of their squishy bits inside either, well, shells, like hermit crabs do. Now, as a matter of fact, this is a coral hermit crab right here. So it is actually living inside of a coral. And do you remember those beady eyes that you and I are also fond of on crustaceans? Look at them. they're so small right there, right? So they have these small eyes, but they have eyes that are almost like, if you've ever looked into a kaleidoscope before, they have something called compound eyes where they can see a lot of the same thing in different little pieces, and they're able to connect that picture together within their eye. So it's pretty incredible the way that these crustaceans have adapted to survive, right? Maybe sometimes living in coral. Now, we saw that crustacean earlier that had those pinchers, right? So we know that it has to be able to grab things to be able to munch on. What about our hermit crab friends? What was it just doing? Well, if you saw all of those wavy things, right, it was basically getting a chance to filter in the water. So it's really cool to be able to see that little hermit crab being able to move around and filter. And it actually eats a lot of plankton that's found in the water there. Now, we did get some participation that came on in, and Mrs. Reyes' class is asking, how many species are there? And there's about 42,000 species, and most of them are marine. So there are definitely a lot out there. And Alexandra is asking, what is an exoskeleton? So once again, the exoskeleton is a hard shell on the outside to protect the gushy parts on the inside. Basically a suit of armor that's on them to really help protect them. Now, it may be really hard. Now, sometimes they may be even really spiny. Sometimes they're really hairy. Sometimes this exoskeleton can even blend in with its habitat, with where it's living. So its exoskeleton is really important. And here's the tricky part, though. We have a crab that's gushy on the inside, super hard on the outside. So when it's small and it needs to grow, how does it do that? Well, if we think of us, when we're young, we grow really fast, right? We always need new clothes. We always need new shoes because our feet are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, believe it or not, these crabs, these crustaceans, these lobsters, these shrimp also grow really big or grow really fast when they are really small. So they do something called molting, where they actually shed the outside of their skeleton and they grow a whole new one on top. If you think about maybe how snakes shed their skin and they get all new, brand new, shiny skin, kind of a similar thing where our crustaceans are able to shed that exoskeleton, but it's super hard, and they're able to grow a new one right on top to protect themselves against predators. So let's go on ahead and watch a video on how that molting process works. All right. And Lucy is asking in the meantime, do crabs bite? Lucy, we'll get to you right after our video. So here we can see, and this is actually a sped up version. If you're wondering what exactly we're looking at here, this is the crab shell. Excuse the shakiness. I think it's just the time frame overall. But here we have our crab. This is the smushy, gushy part on the inside that's slowly coming out and backing out of the shell right here. So it's really cool. And we can see some of its legs coming out right over here. So sometimes when you're on the beach, you might see these shells and you might think, oh my goodness, that crab or that lobster is dead. But believe it or not, if you can open up the back end of the shell, that just means it's molted. And that is an old skeleton of our crab or lobster friend right here. And we can see that, oh, it's almost done. Now this took many hours. It takes a little bit of time to be able to get completely out of the shell, especially for the spider crab that actually is quite large, and we'll get into those in a little bit. But here you can really get a chance to see it's just scooching out all of its little parts so that way it can separate itself from the shell and then grow a new one. So Destiny's asking, why do they need to shed? Well, Destiny, as the crabs grow, they get really tight inside their old shell. Kind of like as you grow, right? And if you wore a shirt over time, as you get bigger, that shirt isn't always going to expand with you, right? Same thing for your shoes. Your feet are going to grow, but your shoes are not going to grow with you. So instead, right, we get bigger clothes or we get bigger shoes. Well, these crabs, they end up backing out of their old skeleton and they end up growing a bigger skeleton. So as they grow, they just make new skeletons to grow along with them. So Destiny, hopefully that answers your question, right? So we get to buy new shoes and new shirts as we get bigger, and our shirts and shoes feel a little bit tight as our feet grow. But overall, as we kind of get bigger, we get bigger things. Same thing for our crabs and our lobsters and our shrimp. They grow bigger exoskeletons or shells. Now, Lucy was asking, do crabs bite? Well, some of them have to in order to eat, right? They have to take bites out of things in order to eat. So if we go on ahead, and I'll let my friend Carrie here, who is showing all of these wonderful pictures, pick a crab of her choice, we can get a chance to see a little bit closer in on some of these crabs. Now, many times they have pinchers, right? And so we could see a pincher right here, and there's actually another one that's off the screen down here. But here we have some of their mouth parts, and these mouth parts are actually a little bit better at kind of ripping things apart. So they bite, but they kind of more like rip, and they're able to use those claws to be able to hold on to their food, and then they're able to maybe take little bits and hold it up to their mouth, and then the mouth kind of takes bites by shredding it, and then hum, yum, yum, yum. They're able to eat it from there. And as a matter of fact, I have a molt that I can share with you, and I could turn it over so we can see what some of those mouth parts are. So with that, here we have our document camera. Hello, and you can see my hands right there. And here I have a California spiny lobster. And this is just a molt of one that I have right here. And I'm going to go on ahead and turn it over so we can get a chance to see some of those mouth parts a little bit better, right? So here we can see that our California spiny lobster actually doesn't have claws like the ones on the East Coast that you see, like the bright red ones that we see in a lot of pictures. Our West Coast spiny lobsters just have a lot of these spines that help protect them all over. And we'll get a chance to delve a little bit deeper into these lobsters in a little bit. But here you can see where its little mouth parts are to kind of help it to be able to eat a little bit. And within there, that is pretty much where they're able to shred. So I know the light's a little bit bright, so I'm going to see if I can try to get a chance to move it away a little bit to be able to see. All right. My colleagues helped me out. Thank you so much. So it's a little tricky to see, but it's right inside here, and that's where they're able to eat and use these parts right here to help it shred the food. So maybe a little bit more shreddy instead of a little bit more bitey. All right. Great questions, though, friends. All right. So we also had Rogelio ask, what if they do not have an exoskeleton? And that is a good question. Now, most of them, actually all of them, do have an exoskeleton because that's one of the ways that, well, you are a crustacean. You have to have that exoskeleton. But you ask a really good question because guess what? Since they have squishy insides, they actually don't have any bones in their body, right? Exoskeleton means outside skeleton. So these ones, even though they're super gushy on the inside, all of their hard parts are actually on the outside. So these animals are considered invertebrates, animals without any backbone. So if it didn't have a skeleton like this, it just might be considered an invertebrate. There are so many different kinds of invertebrates out there. Worms are an invertebrate. Snails are invertebrates. Clams are invertebrates. There's so many different kinds. So if it may not have an exoskeleton, maybe there's another feature, but it would definitely be considered an invertebrate, an animal without that backbone. So thank you for asking. All right, so since we're on our picture of our California spiny lobster, let's go on ahead and explore this one a little bit more. So if we go on ahead and you look at our spiny lobster, it's absolutely beautiful, right? It's not just bright red like the ones on the East Coast. This one has lots of colors. And what colors do you see on our lobster here? I know for me, some colors that I see include red. It almost has like red and white stripy legs, which is really cool. And you can see those jointed appendages, basically right in each little area right here. That's where they can move their appendages or their legs right there. Now, what other colors do you see? You're thinking bright blue. Yes, right? So they have lots of bright blue all around them. And if you see orange or yellow or black, right, there's so many different colors to our spiny lobster. Now, why do you think our spiny lobster are those colors? Any thoughts on that? Hmm. Well, if you're thinking for camouflage, you're absolutely right. So all of these colors really kind of help break up our lobster as a whole. And then from there, it's also in a very colorful environment, right? It's underneath some rocks, so it's likes to hang out in like cracks and crevices. But if you look really closely, there's tons of different kind of algae and sponges and worms that are all encrusting all these, and it's really colorful. So our lobster helps kind of match that colorful environment that it's currently in. Now, if we had to think about it, right, these little feet are really cool. They're great at, well, what do you think? Hanging out in the sand, perhaps? Climbing on rocks? Well, let's go on ahead and see if we can watch a video on these spiny lobster, right? But as we go on ahead and we think about it, what do you think? Well, definitely, I saw lots of little hairs on our spiny lobster, right? And all those little hairs, they also look like really like, almost like little mini claw feet on there. So what do you think? How do you think our lobster walks? Well, let's find out. Oh my goodness. It's just, it almost can kind of swim. It's a very daring lobster, isn't it? Just kind of drops down. Wow, how cool is that? That's so neat, friends. We can watch it again. And look, we can see how it uses those feet to really hook into those rocks. And then, when it feels mighty enough, down it goes, right? And it's almost able to use that tail too, to be able to kind of soften its fall as it kind of goes down. Well, that's cool, because not only were we able to see how it uses all of those different jointed legs right here, but we're also able to see how it's kind of able to use its tail to be able to help it to be able to direct itself and fall as it goes down to the bottom of the ocean, which is pretty cool. So here we have our spiny lobster. Now, it actually lives in a kelp forest environment, which we happen to have some off of our California coast here. And one of their all-time favorite foods is actually a sea urchin. So these spiny lobsters are really great at breaking into the sea urchin, what we like to call test, its skeleton, another invertebrate, if you will. And those little legs that are so great at so spiny and spiky to be able to hold in onto those rocks are also great at jabbing and breaking into a sea urchin. So it's pretty incredible how these lobsters are able to really kind of jab and then break it open and then hum, yum, 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 get a chance to really eat the delicious insides of that sea urchin right there. So here we can get a nice close-up view of our California spiny lobster that we have right here. And you can see all the extra spikes that it happens to have on it right there, including some right in front of its eyes. Awesome. Now, Ishan is asking, do spiny crabs bite? We've had a chance to look at our lobsters, and we saw the mouth parts and that they didn't bite. But if we go to, I'll let Carrie choose a spiny crab of her choice, we can go on ahead and see how many times crabs do have those pincher friends, right? Like when I think about a crab, a lot of times I think of it as like, it's usually in this sort of pose, right? And so these crabs are really good. Here we go. We have a beautiful crab right here. And you can see this one has more delicate pinchers, right? But it has pinchers right here. Now, if you think about it, what do you think might be the reason why these crabs have pinchers? Well, for thinking, for protection, yeah, maybe other animals don't want to come near it because it has those pinchers, right? Other times, maybe it's a way that this animal can hold some food, right? And then bring it into its mouth right here. And once again, it has some of those little shreddy parts too. So that those shreddy parts are able to kind of shred up the food that these little claws here are holding on to. Now, some of them can actually just eat plankton from the water too. We saw our coral or our hermit crab earlier that was waving around, right, to be able to grab some of that plankton. Well, some of these parts, if we had it open up its mouth, which is really hard to do, but if we saw it feeding, and that's when we'd be able to see it, there's little teeny tiny parts in there, and they're always filtering through the water so that way they can eat the plankton that's in there. So they may shred their food or they may filter feed, what we like to call filter feed some of their food too. But they don't really kind of bite because they don't really have teeth like we do? So that's a great question. Thank you for asking. Now, Destiny is asking, why does it have big horns? I'm guessing you're talking about our California spiny lobster. Well, if we think about all those spines, what do you think those spines help our lobster to do? Definitely had those spines near its eyes, but it had spines also all over its antenna, and it had spines and spikes all down its body. Well, if you're thinking spines and spikes helped it to protect itself, you're absolutely right. And it's a way that this lobster can protect itself near its eyes, right? So it's a really cool defense, a really cool way for this animal to be able to protect itself by having those spines right next to its eyes right there, right? And it's a great way to protect your eyes too. Make sure that no one's going to sneak up on you and hurt you, right? So spines, definitely a good thing. And Helena is asking, are the legs and spikes to kill predators? Oh, that's such an interesting question, right? We talked a lot of it being defense, right? That's a way that they can protect themselves from animals, or that they could use some of those jabby legs to be able to break into those sea urchins and gobble them up so they're prey. But what do you think? Do you think it's a way that they could protect themselves from predators? Yeah, so they may, if they ever happen to be in a corner where they may need to fend themselves off from a predator, using those spikes may come to an advantage, right? It may be helpful when they're like, no, I don't want to be eaten, right? And they're able to basically save themselves away by potentially dealing with a predator, say an octopus or something along those lines, right? So it is a way that these animals can protect themselves from other predators too. Thank you for asking. Rogelio is asking, why does it have so much hair? Oh, are you talking about that crab? That is a great observation. And if we think about crabs, we have some crabs known as sheep crabs and other crabs. And so there's a handful of them that are, well, hairy, right? Now that might be not the first thing that you kind of think about when you think crabs or crustaceans, hairy, but a lot of them are. How do you think those hairs might help them out? If you're thinking maybe to attract the other crabs, right? Oh, look at wonderful, beautiful hair you have. Not so much, right? But maybe one of the other crabs is like, oh my, aren't you, beautiful or handsome, right? Oh, all of those hairs, so polished, perhaps. But believe it or not, these hairs are actually a way to camouflage. And maybe having more of those hairs may serve as an extra, way to protect itself, or an extra type of camouflage. But basically, all of these hairs are really great at kind of, copying their environment. So maybe there's a lot of little algae that are in the area. Maybe the rocks in the area look kind of hairy because of all the other kind of hairy animals that live on there. And these crabs are basically saying, hello, look, I'm a rock with hairy things. And they're able to basically just kind of hang out and blend in with their surroundings. So that is a really great question. It looks like Joshua is asking, why do they eat plankton? It is hard to see, but I don't know about you, but I know that if I went ahead, as much as I like pizza as my favorite food, eating it every single day for a long time may get kind of old. Or what if there's no more pizza around, right? I don't want to starve. So these animals go on ahead and they have a varied diet, meaning that they eat lots of different things, because you never know really what you're going to find out in the ocean. Maybe my pizza analogy wasn't the best because there's lots of different foods out there, but who knows if there would ever be a pizza shortage. I sure would hope not. But these animals like to have a varied diet, much like how we like to have a varied diet, right? Gives us different kinds of nutrients and vitamins, and it also depends what they happen to have around them. Maybe there's a dead fish and they're like, yes, score, dead fish. And they can kind of slowly eat that dead fish and go, yum, 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 yum. This is the best day ever. I get to eat a dead fish, right? Other times, maybe their favorite food isn't around and they're like, okay, I'm just going to eat plankton instead because I know I can fill up on plankton. So they'll go on ahead, yum, 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 and they'll filter feed to eat that plankton. So it's just another food source for them. Alexander's asking, can crabs be in a camouflage mode? Oh, you know what the cool thing is? Alexander, crabs, they're always in camouflage mode. Yeah, it's just kind of built into their body, which I think is one of the coolest things, right? It's like camo all the time. So now you may not think being bright red is camouflaged, right? You're like, well, I could see hairy or brown or colorful or spiky as a way to be able to camouflage, but bright red, come on, that just doesn't seem right. But believe it or not, being bright red is still being in camouflage mode. Now, if you're thinking, how is that? Well, as you go deeper in the water, the light is trickier to see over time. It actually slowly fades away the deeper that you go. And not only does the light fade away, but the colors that you see also fade away over time. So our carrier crab right here, even though it does have spikes and some hairs, it is still bright red. And that's because red is the very first color to go away when you go into the water. So the deeper you go, the less colors you're able to see. And red is definitely one that makes it really tricky. So out in the wild, if you were like an animal looking at this crab, more than likely it would probably look kind of dark gray, right? And being dark gray or gray against a gray bottom, right, is actually a type of camouflage. So great question. Now Destiny is asking, why do they have so many legs, right? They do have a lot of legs. Many times we can categorize crustaceans in a variety of ways. And one way we could do it is say that it's like a decapod, meaning deca meaning 10, pod meaning leg. So there are some that have 10 legs. And that's one way that we can talk about crustaceans. Because if we look over here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then another 5 on the other side, which equals 10. Right? And so all these crustaceans have lots of weird and wild and crazy adaptations that really kind of help them to survive. Now, the amount of legs doesn't always kind of define a crustacean, though it defines some kinds. A lot of times what we like to call bilateral symmetry also helps, which means basically if you went ahead and you drew an imaginary line down the middle of this crab, it should look the same on one side or the other. Usually the same thing for like humans too, right? If we kind of put a line down ourselves, we should have like usually an eye on each side, half of a nose on each side. Our mouth would be usually about the same, though we're not always perfectly symmetrical, right? And then we'd basically be the same if we were right down the middle. So that's what we call bilateral symmetry, meaning lateral, right down the middle, and symmetry, the same on each side. So it's a really neat way, if we go on ahead, draw that imaginary line, you can see the same on each side. So really interesting adaptations of these different crustaceans. Now Helena is asking, why do they have thorns, right? Well, those thorns act the same way as those spikes do, or being spiny, right? So just another way for these animals to be able to protect themselves. But I like how you're thinking about different ways to call it, right? They're not always the same size spikes. Some of them are really thin and small, others are really big. And lastly, where do they live? Everywhere, believe it or not. So, fun fact is that a lot of these crustaceans are part of a larger group known as arthropods, right? So arthropods are a group that even thinks about like land animals, or land animals too. So it might be crabs, lobsters, shrimp, or krill, really teeny tiny little crustaceans. But arthropods are also things like, well, spiders and scorpions and things of that nature too. So it's a really large group of animals that really kind of rule the world. So they're pretty incredible invertebrates, right? Animals without any of that backbone. Now we did get a few more questions. Alexander is asking, is a crab venomous? And that is a good question. To my knowledge so far, I don't think there are any venomous crabs. But with there being basically tens of thousands of varieties, I'm sure there's ones that I may not be aware of, and more that still can be discovered because they are incredibly diverse. There's so many different kinds, right? But to my knowledge so far, not that I know of, Alexander. Now, thank you all for joining us today. We had a ton of really great questions, and we definitely appreciate your participation. Now, if there are any teachers out there joining us with your class, we would love to be able to know how many students you have joining you today. That just helps us get a better feel for our programming and helps us to be able to prioritize as well. So if you could text in the number of your students to our number down below, that would be incredibly helpful. Thank you in advance, and thank you all for joining us today. We do have another program at 10 o'clock, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.